It starts in moments so small that nobody knows. It's us, a slammed door, a parent yelling in the next room, the sound of chaos leaking into your childhood like water under a locked door, and you, barely tall enough to reach the light switch, already learning how to read the moods of adults who are supposed to protect you. Do you remember that feeling? The sense that you had to grow up before your body was even ready. Because when no one shields you, you learn to shield yourself, and that changes everything. There is a certain kind of child psychology rarely talked about out loud, because it lives in the quiet places, in the corners of rooms where children sit with their legs pulled to their chest, trying to make sense of storms they didn't cause. It's the psychology of the child who was never protected, the child who learned, far too early, that the world can be unpredictable, unsafe, and unbearably heavy. You might not think of this as a condition or a diagnosis, because it isn't one. It's a pattern, a way of being, a survival blueprint carved into you long before you had the words to describe it. It happens when a child grows up without emotional shelter, when the people who are supposed to be guardians become sources of instability, when you didn't have a safe lap to crawl into, or a calm voice to anchor you, or a gentle hand to help you make sense of your feelings. Instead, you had noise, you had fear, you had unpredictability, you had silence where reassurance should have been. Psychologists sometimes use terms like parentification, insecure attachment, hypervigilance, or complex childhood trauma. But none of these words truly capture the lived reality of it, because the truth is simpler and also sadder. You learn to protect others before anyone protected you. This shapes everything. It shapes the way you walk into a room, already scanning for danger or disappointment. It shapes the way you carry yourself, quiet, careful, as if your very existence might tip the balance of someone else's emotions. It shapes the way you love, the way you choose friends, the way you apologize for things that were never your fault. Even now, as an adult, people might see you as strong, independent, mature for your age, someone who has it together, but they never saw the child version of you, standing in the middle of emotional earthquakes with no one to hold on to. Let me tell you something you might not have heard enough. None of this was your fault. You were a child trying to survive an adult world. And this video is for you not to blame the past, but to illuminate it. To help you understand the invisible architecture of your behaviors, your fears, your strengths, and even your exhaustion. Because the child who is never protected doesn't just disappear. They grow up. They live inside your decisions. They whisper in your relationships. They tug at your sense of safety. But here's the hope. What was learned for survival can be unlearned for peace. And to understand how, we need to go back to the beginning, to the origin of this psychology, to the moment childhood shifted from a playground to a battlefield you didn't sign up for. Every story like this begins with the moments, sometimes one moment, sometimes many, that teaches a child something they should never have had to learn. You're on your own. Maybe it was the day you realized your parent wasn't coming to your school event again. Maybe it was the night you lay awake listening to shouting downstairs, clutching a pillow against your chest, as if it could protect you. Or maybe it was subtle, small emotional absences that chipped away at your sense of safety, like tiny cracks in glass, spreading quietly over time. Children don't have the ability to name these patterns. They don't say, "My parent is emotionally unavailable," or "This household is unsafe." Instead, they internalize everything as their responsibility. Because a child would rather believe they are the problem than believe that the world is unsafe. It's the mind's way of trying to stay in control. So you learn to monitor everything. You watched the way your parent walked into the room. You listened for changes in tone, changes in breathing. You memorized the early signs of anger, sadness, stress, because knowing these things felt like survival. You became an emotional thermostat, regulating the temperature of the household with your own behavior, trying to cool things down before they explode. And what's heartbreaking is that you didn't even realize you were doing it. It was instinct, survival instinct. Children who aren't protected stop asking for protection. They start giving it. You comforted adults who should have comforted you. You learned to soothe people who should have soothed you. You stood guard at emotional doors that should have been guarded for you. And slowly, the child in you faded, not gone, but buried. Buried under responsibility, fear, and an awareness no child should carry. There's a moment, usually somewhere in late childhood, when the transformation becomes complete. You don't notice it at the time. It's not dramatic, not loud, but it is faltering. It happens the first time you stop expecting someone to check on you. The first time you wipe your own tears because you already know no one's coming. The first time you swallow your fear to avoid burdening the very people who caused it. You become older without growing older. You become small without being seen as small. You become brave without ever choosing bravery. Maybe you were the one who pulled your younger siblings behind you during an argument. Maybe you were the one who cleaned the mess before an angry parent got home. Maybe you were the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, who tiptoed around moods, who learned to anticipate storms before they formed. You became the peacekeeper, the caretaker, the emotional sponge, the parent in a child's body. And deep down the narrative formed. If I'm not perfect, things fall apart. If I stop watching, something bad will happen. If I don't take care of everything, no one will. This is how hypervigilance begins, not as a psychological term, but as a terrified child's attempt at stability. As you grew, the world mistook this survival strategy for maturity. They praised you for being responsible, helpful, resilient, understanding, ever realizing these weren't personality traits but armor pieces forged out of fear. And because no one protected you, you didn't learn that you deserved protection. You didn't learn that help was something you could ask for. You didn't learn that being small, confused, or scared was allowed. So you walked into adolescence and then adulthood, with a buried child inside you. A child who never cried loud enough to disturb anyone. A child who never asked for more than scraps of emotional safety. A child who raised themselves while the world applauded their strength. This is where the symptoms begin. Not as flaws, but as echoes. Echoes of a childhood that demanded adulthood too soon. You might not realize how deeply your unprotected childhood shaped you until you start noticing the patterns, those quiet habits, those subtle reactions, those invisible reflexes that feel like second nature. The signs aren't loud. They rarely announce themselves. They live in your daily decisions, your relationships, your fears, your exhaustion. One of the clearest signs is the way you scan people. You don't even mean to. You just read them. Every expression, every shift in tone, every pause after a sentence. It's like your brain never stopped being on guard duty. You walk into a room and instantly sense the emotional temperature, adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering anything dangerous. This kind of hypervigilance can make you seem intuitive, empathetic, even wise, but inside, it's exhausting. Because you're not observing out of curiosity. You're observing out of fear of what might happen if you miss something. Then there's the strange guilt that follows you everywhere. You feel guilty for asking for help, guilty for saying no, guilty for resting, guilty for taking up space. It's as if you believe you must earn your right to exist by being useful, agreeable, or selfless. Sometimes you don't even realize how deeply this runs you. Say, "I am sorry," without knowing why. You feel bad for inconveniencing someone by simply having needs. You apologize for emotions you were taught were too heavy or too loud. Another sign appears in how you handle kindness. When someone is gentle with you, you freeze for a second, unsure of how to receive it. It feels unfamiliar, almost dangerous, like stepping onto ground you're not sure will hold your weight. You've spent so much time being the protector that being protected feels foreign. You might even push away the people who try to care for you, not because you don't want love, but because you don't know how to believe it's real. You might also notice a tendency toward relationships where you become the fixer, the emotional caretaker, the one who stabilizes everything. You're drawn to people who need help, who are overwhelmed, who are lost, because caring for others feels natural to you. It feels safe. It feels like purpose. But deep down, it's also reenactment. You're repeating the role you learned as a child, hoping that this time, someone will finally reciprocate. And when they don't, you blame yourself. Because that's what children who were never protected learn to do, make themselves responsible for everything. There's also the exhaustion that sits in your bones, the kind that sleep doesn't fix. It's the fatigue of carrying emotional weight for years, of staying alert even when no one else sees the danger. It's the heaviness of feeling older than your age, of being tired not because of what you're doing now, but because of what you did when you were too young to handle it. It's compassion fatigue disguised as personality. Another sign is your difficulty making decisions for yourself. You're good at making choices that benefit others, but when it comes to your own needs, you freeze. You second-guess your desires, doubt your instincts, and fear making the wrong move. This indecisiveness, the remnants of a childhood where your choices didn't matter, or where your preferences were ignored, dismissed, or punished. And then there is the mask, the smile you learned to wear, even when you were breaking. People might describe you as calm, composed, the strong one. But that strength came from never having anyone to fall apart with. You learned to hide your fear, your frustration, your sadness, because showing those emotions made things worse in your childhood home. So you built a mask so convincing that even you sometimes believe it. You might also struggle to trust people deeply, not because you dislike them, but because vulnerability was never safe for you. Letting someone see the real you feels like opening the door to danger. You've learned to be hyper-independent, relying only on yourself, because relying on others was never an option when you were young. People see your independence as admirable, but they don't see the loneliness underneath, the desperate wish that someone would take care of you, just once, without you having to earn it. And perhaps one of the saddest signs is the way you minimize your own pain. You tell yourself, other people had it worse, or it wasn't that bad, or I should be over this by now. That's self-gaslighting. It says what happens when a child has feelings were dismissed so often that they learn to dismiss themselves. These symptoms aren't flaws. They're survival tools that never got retired. They're echoes of a childhood where you learned to protect yourself because no one else did. Psychologists have spent decades trying to understand what happens to a child who grows up without protection. And the findings all point to the same truth. The brain adapts to survive. Not in dramatic movie-like ways, but in quiet, lasting patterns that shape everything from emotional reactions to relationships to identity. When a child grows up in an environment where safety is uncertain, the nervous system shifts into a state of chronic alertness. This is where hypervigilance begins, not as a personality trait, but as a neurological adjustment. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for scanning for threats, becomes overactive. It fires at even the slightest hint of danger. Over time, your body learns to live in fight-or-flight mode, even when the danger is gone. Scientists at the University of Berkeley have shown that children raised in unpredictable or emotionally volatile homes display stronger, more reactive stress responses well into adulthood. This also affects your locus of control, the belief about how much power you have over what happens to you. When you were young, you learned that chaos erupted at any moment. You learned that things could go wrong regardless of your efforts. And yet, paradoxically, you also learn to blame yourself for everything. This creates a fragile, unstable sense of control. You feel responsible for outcomes you can prevent, and helpless in situations where you actually do have power. There is also the impact on attachment theory. Without protection, the nervous system doesn't learn what secure attachment feels like. Instead, it learns to bond through caution, fear, or appeasement. This is where the fawn response develops a trauma instinct, where you soothe or please others to keep yourself safe. Researchers writing in the Journal of Personality describe this as pathological altruism, a pattern where your kindness becomes a form of self-erasure. Even your extraordinary sensitivity or ability to read rooms, sense tension, anticipate emotional shifts has a scientific root. It's linked to the functioning of mirror neurons, the brain cells that help us understand other people's emotions. Children who grow up monitoring their parents for signs of danger develop hypersensitive mirror neuron systems. It becomes second nature to absorb someone else's mood before you're even aware of your own. Carl Jung's work also speaks to this. He wrote about the shadow self, parts of us that develop in the dark, out of necessity, out of fear. For the unprotected child, the shadow becomes a hiding place for all the pain, confusion, and unmet needs. Not because those parts are bad, but because there was never a safe adult to help carry them. Modern neuroscience, ancient psychology, attachment theory, they all say the same thing. Children who aren't protected adapt brilliantly, but at a deep cost. Their minds become fortresses, their hearts become quiet, their bodies become battlegrounds of tension. And because no one taught them how to feel safe, they grow into adults who don't know what safety feels like. Here's what no one tells you about being the child who was never protected. You grow up looking strong on the outside while quietly falling apart on the inside. People see your resilience, your maturity, your calmness, and they admire it. They rely on it. They praise you for always being the stable one. They don't realize that the stability they celebrate was born from chaos. They don't see that your strength is actually the absence of permission to be anything else. The dark truth is that your childhood robbed you of something invisible but essential, the belief that you deserve safety. When you grow up without protection, you don't just lose a guardian, You lose a foundational sense of trust in the world. A part of you is always waiting for something to go wrong, always preparing for the next blow, always bracing for disappointment. There's a loneliness here that words can barely touch, the kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people, yet feeling like no one truly sees you, because how could they? They didn't see the child curled in bed, trying to breathe quietly through the fear. They didn't see the small hands cleaning up the messes of adults. They didn't see the tears you learned to cry silently so you wouldn't cause trouble. They didn't see the way you swallowed your needs until you convinced yourself you didn't have any, and the world rewards this. That's the dark part. The world applauds your self-sufficiency. You're so mature. You're so strong. You're so put together. You're the reliable one. But inside, you're carrying an invisible weight, one so heavy it bends your posture. One so old it feels like it's fused to your bones. You've spent years being the caregiver, the peacekeeper, the protector. So when someone finally asks you what you need, you freeze, because you don't know how to answer. You were never taught the language of your own needs. There's also the quiet suffering, the way you collapse only in private, the way you wait until you're alone to fall apart, the way you hide your struggles because being vulnerable feels like danger, the way you carry pain that no one knows about because you assume no one would want to carry it with you. This is the hidden reality. You learn to treat yourself the way the world treated you. You learn to ignore your own pain. You learn to push yourself too hard. You learn to stay silent even when you're breaking. And the deepest truth of all is this: there is a child inside you, teeny, frightened, exhausted, still waiting for someone to finally say, "It wasn't your job to be strong. You should have been protected. You survived what no child should have had to survive." And now, years later, that survival has become your personality, your armor, your identity. But armor gets heavy, and the child inside you is tired. Healing from a childhood without protection, T about rewriting the past, S about learning how to give yourself now what you never received then. It's slow, it's gentle, it's uncomfortable at times, but it's possible. And it begins with something deceptively simple: acknowledging the child inside you who never stopped waiting. The first step is learning to feel safe, freely safe. Not the kind of safety that comes from staying small or pleasing everyone around you, but the kind that comes from being grounded in yourself. Safety is a sensation, a physical experience. It lives in the body before it ever reaches the mind. Sometimes it's just placing your hand on your chest and saying, "I'm here, I won't abandon you." It sounds small, almost silly, but for someone who never had protection, it's revolutionary. It's the beginning of reparenting, the process of becoming the safe adult you needed. Another part of the path forward is confronting the shadow self Carl Jung spoke about. All the parts of you that were buried out of necessity, the anger, the fear, the sadness, the longing, they're not weaknesses. They're pieces of your story that were never allowed to exist. Shadow work isn't about digging up pain to suffer again. It's about giving those parts of you a voice, letting them be seen without shame, letting them be real. When you do this, the child who has been hiding for years slowly steps out of the dark. Then there's the healing of boundaries. For the child who was never protected, boundaries feel like betrayal. You learn to survive by anticipating others' needs, not by protecting your own. But boundaries are not walls, they are doors. Doors you get to open selectively. Doors you learn to close without guilt. Doors that remind your nervous system that your worth is not based on usefulness. You also have to relearn softness, the kind of softness that lets you rest without earning it. That allows you to say, "I need help," without feeling weak. That lets you cry without apologizing. Softness is not the opposite of strength. It is the birthplace of real strength, the kind that doesn't come from fear, but from self. And finally, healing comes from understanding a truth. Many people go their whole lives without learning. You don't have to protect everyone anymore. The world doesn't collapse if you're not holding it together. Your value is not measured by how much you endure. The path forward is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the person you were supposed to be before the world demanded you grow up too fast. You're not broken, you're healing, and there is a profound difference. If you grew up unprotected, you learned to armor yourself in ways no child should ever have to. But here's the quiet truth I want to leave you with. You are allowed to put down the armor now. You are allowed to unclench your jaw, release your shoulders, breathe more gently. The war you survived is not happening anymore, even if your body still thinks it is. You spent years being strong, years being vigilant, Years holding everything together while no one held you. And yet here you are, still standing, still feeling, still trying. That is not weakness. That is resilience of the rarest kind. But resilience does not have to mean carrying everything alone. Strength does not have to mean silence. Survival does not have to be your only story. You never had the childhood you deserved, but you still have the future you deserve. And this time, you get to choose. You get to choose people who show up. You get to choose softness over fear. You get to choose rest without guilt. You get to choose a life where your needs matter, where your feelings count, where that unseen child inside you is finally safe. You are not the chaos you grew up in. You are not the mistakes of the adults who failed you. You are not the burden you were made to feel like. You are becoming someone new, not because the past didn't hurt, but because you survived it. And that means you can heal from it. This time, you get to protect yourself. This time, you get to grow not out of fear, but out of freedom. And that is the beginning of everything.